Okay, we're live, everyone. I want to greet everyone and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We have people joining us from the US, from Africa, Australia, the Bahamas, and today is a special day because we're going to be talking about nature and why nature is important to us. And as a result, we have very esteemed speakers, the likes of IUCN and Nature for All, Human Nature Projects, Nature Conservancy, and one of our colleagues from University of British Columbia. We're hosting this webinar in conjunction with Friends of the Environment. Juliet, who is over here, will be moderating the session, and BLI Global in partnership with UNEP and Youth Can Network. So we hope you all have an eventful and enjoying experience. We will also be taking questions from the audience. So please, if you'd like to ask questions, you can write in the live stream, and we shall be picking up the questions. So Julie, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for those introductions. As introduced, my name is Juliet Grace from Uganda. I'm the founder of Friends for the Environment, a community-based organization focusing on environmental education, and I'm happy to be moderating this discussion. Today's conversation features young environmental activists who are at the front line of conservation and sustainability work. I have the pleasure to be joined by 4 panelists who I will invite to briefly introduce themselves and tell us what they think about this year's theme for Time for the Nature. I'll start with you, Susan. If you could briefly introduce yourself and what you think about this year's theme. Susan, are you able to hear me?
Susan,
Yes.
unmute you. Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Susan. First of all, I want to wish us all a happy Environment Day. So I'm a student at the University of British Columbia here in Canada. I'm studying Masters of International Forestry. So for this year's theme, I think is very important. You can see what is going on in the world. And the fact that we keep talking about this every day doesn't mean we should give up. So it's a reminder for us to know the importance that biodiversity plays in our societies, to see that there are solutions. Most of them are nature-based. Most of them are our forests, which is my area of specialization. So I think this year's theme is timely and a reminder to all of us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I'll now introduce Camila to also briefly introduce yourself in 2 minutes and tell us what you think about this year's theme. Camila, if you could unmute yourself.
Oh, unmuted. Here we go. Happy World Environment Day to everybody. I'm Camila. I'm from Argentina. I'm based in the US, and I work for the IUCN Commission on Education and Communication. And like my colleague said, this theme is extremely timely, not only because nature holds many of the solutions to our most pressing environmental problems, but also because, as you will see through the Nature for All campaign, we really celebrate what nature does for each of us individually and how healthy and happy it makes us. So it's a pleasure to join you on this event.
Thank you very much, Camila. I'll now turn to you, Elliot.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be part of this event. I think it's, as the other speakers have mentioned, a really, really timely gathering of all of us. By way of introduction, I'm the founder and CEO of Human Nature Projects, which is an international environmental NGO with volunteers across about 104 countries. So managing those global operations. And I think with respect to this year's World Environment Day, of which I'm part of the organising committee, so very, very invested in the event. But I do think it's very, very timely that we have these discussions. 2020 was meant to be this big biodiversity super year, creating new ambitious goals and actions towards improving our conservation measures. So with COVID introducing new complications, new threatening factors and diverse interests to take into account, it's very, very important that we be able to connect across different countries, different perspectives, to share our thoughts on this important day, to come up with new ideas.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Mercy, now I would like to turn to you as well. Share briefly your introduction and what you think about our theme for this year.
Yes, well, good morning, good day, good night, wherever you are to everyone. My name is Marcia Musgrove. I was born, raised, and still live in the Bahamas, and I am policy advisor for the Nature Conservancy, the Northern Caribbean program, which covers the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos. Time for nature. If you ask me, it's always time for nature. But one of the things that comes to mind is the world recently seems to have been thrown into just another set of upheaval. And while there is a lot of distress, while a lot of people are thinking about the economy and health and all of these things, and my heart goes out to everyone who's impacted, the other thing that I feel has happened is it's caused many of us to just pause and recognize how connected we are to the earth, how much we need it for our survival, to step outside your house and take a breath. People now are trying to find some reprieve by walking outside in a forest or a park or the sea, or taking to their yard to garden and plant, because we realize that we need just the earth for our survival. And so in the midst of all that's going on, the fact that we can actually take time to pause and to think and to reconsider our connection to the earth, I think time for nature is a really appropriate thing.
Thank you very much, Mercy. And my panelists, thank you very much for those amazing contributions that you've made. Let me take this opportunity to remind our audience that you can ask questions, react to the statements by our speakers, and even present your recommendations and ideas on the different topics that we'll be discussing this morning, afternoon, evening. Don't forget to use the live chat box function on Facebook, YouTube, or even send us your input. We'll have a dedicated segment later for these conversations, respond to your questions, and discuss your input. So please continue to stay engaged. I want to turn to you, Susan. I understand that your focus is on forests. So if you could briefly share with us what the role of forests play, what role forests play in preserving biodiversity. Susan, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. So I'll be talking on the role of forests in preserving biodiversity. So let's look at what biodiversity is. So biodiversity represents the variety of plants and animals, and this includes man. According to some scientists, they estimate that we have about 8 million species of plants and animals living on Earth, and this includes man. So biological diversity also constitutes their habitats, the millions of species, the different individuals, and the characteristics they all have and share together. So this biodiversity, it is immense and very huge, but the more diversity, the more secure and resilient all life on Earth is. And these species, they depend on each other. They share synergies and interconnections. And most of these interconnections are in unexpected ways. So by removing just one species, which is most likely caused by man, we unintentionally cause a catastrophic effect that have big impact, sometimes in a region, in an entire habitat, or even an entire species. So because of this, we need billions of pollinators and especially soil microorganisms to keep the food we eat in supply. And at the same time, we can see that in as much as we need this, activities caused by man again has drastically reduced the number of pollinators, especially in Europe, where the number has reduced to 75%. And then in Africa, where I come from, we have more traditional beekeepers. And most of these traditional beekeepers, they burn their bees to harvest honey. They use pesticides, herbicides, and inorganic fertilizers, even on their farms. And in the process of using these chemicals, they kill most of these pollinators. They pollute our water bodies and this affects the soil nutrients as well. So I want to share a case study with you. I was reading a report at the Yellowstone National Park where they talked about when human settlers moved into US and the population grew, wolves were nearly extinct as a result of this migration. And because wolves are top predators, without them, deers and elk boomed and began eating more young trees and plants. And because of the presence of these bears, the beavers couldn't build their dams, which is their own natural way of doing things, and their population decreased. And then with fewer trees, because the deers and elk are feeding on these trees and plants to stabilize the soil, riverbanks eroded, affecting both rivers and many species that depend on them for survival. I also want to share a case study in Africa where we have locusts in some parts of Africa. These locusts, they're in large numbers, they are affecting agricultural products and farmers. And from this, when I was reading about this topic, and then it occurred to me that it may be as a result of their predators being extinct, because there are predators that feed on these locusts. But now, maybe to some extent, they are extinct. I can't be sure. That's why their presence in Africa is causing so much damage, especially to agriculture. And in the long run, this will affect food security. So let's look at trees now. Every minute we cut down trees the size of a football pitch. And because of these, trees are habitat to most of this biodiversity. Because we are cutting down these trees are going extinct 1,000 times faster than usual. And then the soils in these forests are being exposed to direct sunlight. This exposure also exposes the forest soil microorganisms, and thereby they lose their nutrients. And then man is also introducing non-native tree species, and then we are using chemicals everywhere on our farms. And because of this, these activities have multiple effects on species and at the same time. Let's look at the impact of climate change. Look at species such as penguins and polar bears. They are threatened already, but because of climate change, their risk of going extinct is very high because of unpredicted weather patterns. And so because of all these activities and impact, our ecosystems have been altered. An altered ecosystem takes hundreds or thousands of years to recover, if at all they recover. So what can we do? This is where the role of trees comes in. So the good thing is there is hope. We have the solution. It's just for us to take actions so we can reverse some of these negative actions. I talked about the wolves earlier. So when this happened in the early 1990s, some scientists and wildlifers reintroduced wolves at the Yellowstone National Park. If you go to the Yellowstone National Park now, you will see that the ecosystem has been restored. So it's possible to restore our ecosystem. We can restore our landscapes, we can restore our ecosystems. Let's look at agriculture, which also contributes to climate change. We don't have a solution to that. Because of climate change, it doesn't mean we can't eat. Let's practice agroforestry, where we can combine both crops and trees on the same piece of land, and both the trees and the crops will be supplementing each other. So we need this forest. We need forest as much as 1/3 of the Earth's surface to absorb carbon and to keep our climate stable, and also to improve the quality of air we breathe. We need millions of these wild pollinators to pollinate our crops, our trees, and the new growths we are raising. We also need these billions of microorganisms. These forest microorganisms, they play an important role in nutrient cycling. We still need our plants for food, for medicine, for all of these wildlife and biodiversities. We need to preserve and protect our coral reefs and manage our mangrove swamps to preserve the coasts we depend upon. Because for only when life is at its most varied, vigorous, and biodiverse that we can hope to thrive and improve the quality of our life. Thank you. And this is my presentation.
Thank you, Susan. So I have a question here from Peter from the UK, and he's asking what is being done to control the locust invasion in Africa? And then another one from Mabel from Ghana, and she's asking, how do you think cities can preserve or conserve trees in the cities? Because there's always a competition for space for buildings as well.
Okay, I'll start with the first question about the locusts in Africa. This is a huge challenge to most of these farmers because most of these farmers are smallholder farmers. They don't even have access to to facilities like loans and subsidies. So they are managing these locusts in a very local and primitive way. Most of them resort to using these chemicals that we are still preaching against. So this is what is happening in Africa about the locusts. And then for cities, we see green areas, we see green parks. Now people are going into buildings that are very sustainable. I'll mention, for instance, here where I'm schooling, there's a building of over 500 rooms. It's called the Common Brooks. Maybe you guys can check it online. It's a green building. It's the first of its kind. And when I was asking about it, that if something like this can happen, is possible, why can't we have more? But then they talked about how expensive it is. So that's why people are like skeptical or conserve about going into developing such a building. And also I remember in Morocco, when we went for COP, I think there is a city there that is called the Green City. If you go there, everything is green, sustainable. Even though it's in a city, you could see that it's green and sustainable. So we practice urban forestry, where we plant trees in the city along walkways, on the roads, and at designated places, and at around parks as well, some parks where kids can play. So urban forestry is possible. We have species that are suitable for urban forestry. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you very much. I hope the questions have been answered and that the people that have asked them have been satisfied with the responses. This moment, I would like to introduce Camila to also share with us what she thinks about this year's theme for World Environment Day and what actually nature for all means. Basically, what I want you to share with us about the discovery zone and how access to such resources can be attained by people out there. Camila?
Absolutely, thank you. I'm going to share my screen because I prepared some slides to guide us along, so let me know when you can see them. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, Camila, we are able to see the slide.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you a bit of the work that CEC and Nature for All are doing, which are really ultimately all about educators and storytellers to help highlight the work of some of the speakers, for example, that are in this event like me, to inspire others to protect nature as well. So the Commission on Education and Communication is one of the 6 commissions of IUCN, and we rely on environmental educators and communicators to try and influence behaviors towards conservation and sustainability. So like other IUCN commissions, we are a network of volunteers, and we are now up to 1,700 individual members of our commission. And Maria, one of our dear organizers, is a very active CEC member. So she can also tell you more about her experience. So if you would like to join this family of communicators and educators, you can very easily just visit this link, create a very short profile, and apply to be a part of this commission. So I will share this presentation later, and you can always access it. So the Nature for All movement is a campaign that CEC members have dedicated a lot of time and effort to in the past 4 years, in collaboration with another IUCN commission, the World Commission on Protected Areas, and the support of partners like the Parks Canada Agency. We've created this movement, which is not an organization, it's really a partnership of now over 400 organizations around the world who all have one thing in common, and that is trying to create better connections between people and nature, especially when nature is not easily available to us. And the reason for being of our campaign is synthesized in these 2 documents, which I encourage you to visit. They really summarize all of the evidence that shows that a deep, visceral, emotional connection with nature, especially at a younger age, really has an effect towards how we behave towards the planet and influences our conservation behaviors, but that it also has very positive effects on our health and well-being. So as part of the Nature for All partnership, organizations create learning resources together. They have a platform to promote the work that they're doing on the ground. And it also allows organizations from different parts of the world to connect with each other, and also for organizations working in the same region to connect with each other through this partnership. So to become a Nature for All organization, you can also fill out unlike CEC, which is for individual members, this is for organizations to become partners. You can also fill out a very short form and join the movement. But one particular resource that I wanted to focus on today is our recently launched Discovery Zone. In the last few weeks, we just realized that as we strive to highlight stories of connection with nature, the past few weeks have been extremely difficult in different ways in different parts of the world, but many of us are at home, many children are out of school, and many of us are not able to easily connect to nature during lockdown or under stay-at-home orders. So we activated our partnership to really source the best of their resources and put them in one place where families, children, teachers can easily access a wide array of educational resources about nature. So I'm just going to go to this link and just quickly show you what it's all about, because there are really 2 ways that I would like to invite everyone to engage. And one is, of course, to visit it and discover all the resources that we have on it. Now we have about 200 educational resources that you can access through this link, but we also have a calendar of events. If you are hosting an online event related to nature, it can be featured on this calendar. So apart from discovering what we have on there, you can also either share your resources or share your events and make them available to our wide partnership. So I'm going to quickly go into the Discovery Zone. And we've launched probably about 3 weeks ago now, and we continue to try and improve our user experience. So we invite everybody to please use it, let us know what you think, and provide any input so that we can make this better. Okay. So for example, this is how you would look for the resources that you are searching for. You can search by type of audience. You can search by type of resource. So for example, just to give you an example here, if you wanted to look for reading materials, I'm going to go with French, and you can search, and then you have a variety of materials that you can easily download directly from here. So this is really a collection of what our partners are doing, and we really would invite all of you to help us populate it. And it's not a resource that, we thought it would be very useful in these difficult times, but we also think that it can continue to be very useful, hopefully far beyond this pandemic and this crisis. So thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this event. And I hope that my fellow speakers here will join us, as your stories are exactly the type of stories that we try to highlight through Nature for All. So thank you very much. It's really an honor.
Yeah, thank you, Camilla. So I just have 2 questions here. One from Male, I hope I pronounced that right. And they're asking, thank you for the presentation. Are the resources on the platform free for the audience? And then another one from Kaya, who's asking, how can they be more engaged as in the CEC community, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yes, all the resources on the Nature for All Discovery Zone are free to use. So anything can be easily downloaded from its original link, but also we invite everybody to submit their materials also for free. And in terms of being engaged as a CEC member, we have regional vice chairs for every region who are the main focal point for each of our members. But myself, as the program officer for the commission, I'm always available to answer any questions from any of our members. Other ways that you can engage is through a very active Facebook group that we have that has about 17,000 members. And this is really where a lot of our members share the work that they do day to day and their experiences. And tools like the Nature for All Discovery Zone is really a good example of the type of platform that we try to create for our members. So I hope that that you will explore them and just help us make them better.
Yeah, thank you very much, Camila, for that interesting presentation. I hope our audience will definitely visit the website and join the community and also share their resources with the rest of us. I would like to now turn to Elliot. Susan shared about the importance of forests. And now to you, Elliot, the havoc of the Australian bushfires. Can you briefly share about the havoc of the Australian bushfires and what young people are doing to protect nature from such catastrophes?
Thank you very much. And it's, as I already mentioned, a real honor to be amongst such passionate speakers. So thank you again to Camilla and to Maria for organizing the event. I think it's a really important, timely occasion. Yeah, with regards to the bushfires, I did have a few slides I was going to share. So if you wait a second. Okay. Can you see
As
that?
Elliot prepares his presentation, feel free to send your questions. Not yet, Elliot.
Oh, okay.
Don't forget to send in your questions and we'll be able to answer them.
Elliot, you just tap on the share screen at the button at the bottom. Then it should be
Yeah,
able
I've got
to
a
share.
PowerPoint.
Oh,
Does that
okay.
work? Otherwise, I can just make do. That's fine. It doesn't seem to come up as an option.
Is okay. Well, if you click on the share screen, it should show you all the tabs on your computer, and then you can just click on the tab that has the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, weird. It's not coming up. Anyway, I can share this with you. Can you see that then?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so I did have a few slides to share. It seems that's not working, but this is the Human Nature Project's website. So what I did wanted to talk about is just reframing some of what's already been discussed about how we can adapt to these changing circumstances, especially as youth, to negotiate this changing field. And I will mention that Human Nature Projects itself has been working on its own educational toolkit. So I do recognize that's a really, really important part of this debate. And kudos to Camilla and everyone else who is part of that Nature for All committee for putting those resources together. I do know they're a very, very valuable resource to draw upon in the work we do. So yeah, I'm calling in from Sydney right now, and as many of you will be aware, we've been very, very badly affected by the bushfire season from the end of 2019, so the start of summer here, and numbers vary, but it's in the billions of vertebrates of animals that have been killed or affected by the fires. So it's going to be a long time recovering from the incident. I personally am an animal carer, wildlife rescuer here in Sydney. So that's a whole new, unique perspective on the issue, being able to see all these injured animals coming in through the doors, trying to nurse them back to health, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. But what I did realize, certainly in those times, was just the importance of community. So what Human Nature Projects is trying to do is create a very powerful conservation community. So especially looking at creating an entry point for those who might not necessarily be involved in environmentalism, who just want a very easy way of starting out. So keeping it very accessible, very engaging, but focusing especially on youth and those typically unrepresented groups of people who might not otherwise have a say. So, I mean, recently we've been doing some research ourselves into public viewpoints, which is really, really interesting, coming out of some of the major setbacks of recent times. So you can find it on our website here if you're interested, but I'll just go into it briefly. So what we did is we took 1,000 environmentalists, people who were actively engaged in this field, and gave them I think it was a 15-question survey overall, a few more than a dozen questions to answer. And out of the multiple choice questions, they got less than a random chance. So they would have done better if they were guessing, or if you got a group of monkeys to do it, or what have you. So really, really interesting results that came out of it. Nobody got full marks. So it just goes to show some of the knowledge gaps in the field, but also some of the biases in the way we look at progress and conservation, some of the faults in our worldview, if you will. So you can look through this in your own time, of course, but to give you some insight, one thing that came out really strongly was, I guess, a lot of pessimism at the current state of things. So typically there was an overwhelming response for the most negative answer, which sometimes was correct, often not. And the second question was around the biodiversity on Earth. So how many species do we think there are? That was actually my favorite question, just because of the range of responses that came out. One very creative person wrote -8 species. And I think we had one result which was septillion, something like that, a very, very large number. So some of those you can see here. Moving on, there are some things which people do fairly well on. So they typically will be aware that very little biodiversity is described. So there is a large amount of unknown, and they recognize that. There's also, however, questions about the role of nature. So people may not be aware about how deeply interconnected biodiversity is with other factors. So it affects 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's 40% of the world's economy. These are really, really key statistical numbers to be aware of, but very little known. And the last thing I did want to bring up was what people thought about world issues. So we got them to score, or to allocate 100 points to the 5 largest world issues for conservation, which they thought were around today. And climate change came out overwhelmingly first, followed by pollution. They took about 2/3 of all points scored, which is what I guess in hindsight you might expect from the current worldview, from the current perspective. However, according to the IPBES, so according to one of the most authoritative sources in their 2019 report, those two are 3rd and 4th highest on the scale of things. So they've just been blown somewhat, I guess, out of proportion by media, by the impact they have perhaps on humans as well. So we have to recognize this very strong humanitarian aspect to all of the work we do. We do very much need to recognize the role people have to play in this, and Human Nature Projects is all about integrating that into discussions. But yeah, I thought it really important to bring that up. So, I mean, with coronavirus, we have a whole new dimension. The illegal wildlife trades come into discussion, but climate change with the Australian bushfires was the primary issue of debate. And we do need to recognize there's so many other issues at play. So deforestation in Australia is really, really bad. As I think it's the largest front in a developed country for deforestation, which is threatening a lot of our native fauna, very, very vulnerable ecosystems. They're not used to the change, some of the management practices we try and integrate on them. So yeah, I thought that was worth bringing up in the midst of this discussion. And of course, you can look at that in your own time, but there's plenty more on the website for you to go through in case you're interested. Going back to the bushfires, what I did want to bring up was, again, that community sense that I got out of the whole event. And I wasn't there for the entire span. I was doing some wildlife filmmaking in Africa over January, so I was fortunate enough actually to miss some of the worst of it. But certainly working with folks back home and in the aftermath of it all, there was certainly a huge rise in volunteering in conservation, in youth engagement in these issues. Australia's always been fortunate to have a strong youth climate movement, so that certainly has been bolstered by these current events. And I think what it does show is there's a tremendous amount of goodwill out there. So typically working as we are in these sort of echo chambers of environmentalism, in these very close confined groups of like-minded people, we tend to I guess, polarized opinions of conservation, of environmentalism. So we're not typically recognizing how alike, I guess, we are, how invested the vast majority of us are in protecting animals, protecting wild places. It's definitely a uniting factor. And Australia is infamous for having a very poor political representation on environmental issues. But a lot of the recent reports, a lot of the recent surveys that have been conducted have seen a fairly unanimous interest in changing that for the better. So in voting in politicians who are very much invested, equally invested in these issues. And what we certainly do know is that environmentalism spans all viewpoints, cultures, languages, discussions, political ideologies. So as youth, we're very much engaged with these issues. And the important further step I think we all need to try and make is in trying to generate discussions between different groups, especially age groups. So between, say, youth activists, between youth organizations and the larger conservation community, or between conservation itself and the broader populace. So I know in the spaces we're working in, I know we're all working as volunteers, so we're very, very committed to these issues. But what we do need to recognize is the power of what I call mass individualism. So working together as collectives, whilst keeping with our own skill sets, our passions, what we love to do. So recognizing the power of the individual, but then joining up as collectives, as groups to form that very, very powerful sort of dual relationship, which allows a lot of what Human Nature Projects does and so many other organizations to really, really thrive in this space, which is very, very challenging to work in. So I think that was most of what I wanted to bring up. Fortunately, those slides don't seem to be working, but are there any questions?
Yeah, so thank you, Elliot, for that presentation. Yes, there are questions, but in the interest of time, can we ask them to you at the end of towards the end of the session, so we can have Marcia also come in and speak? And so Marcia, I know we met at COP and you're very active in the Oceania region and when it comes to oceans and ocean species. So we wanted to hear from you why we should all be stewards of the marine environment and how nature rewards us as stewards. Marcia, could you?
Morning. Yes, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. So thanks again for the invite. And so happy to be here, Time for Nature. And I've titled my short presentation, A Call to Reverse the Decline of Oceans. And so I work for the Nature Conservancy. And for those who may not know, the Nature Conservancy is the largest conservation nonprofit in the world with a global reach of over 79 countries and territories. Started up out of the US more than 60 years ago, but then we've spread across the globe. And the way we work is very place-based. So wherever we have projects, we are focusing on what are the national priorities for that area or regional priorities. We're not a scientific organization, but everything we do is science-based. And so we have more than 400 scientists on staff. And we also get our work done through a network of relationships. That's partners in conservation, trustees, and more than 1 million members across the US mainly, as well as some of our other territories. In the Caribbean, this just shows a map of where we work. So we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, just south of the United States, and the yellow star shows you where I am in the Bahamas. So in the Caribbean, Our vision is a resilient Caribbean where both nature and people can thrive, which is a little bit of a shift from where the organization first started with focusing on nature itself, but then eventually realized that people are a part of nature, we impact nature, and nature impacts us. So there's no separating them. Um, as for me, I'm going to try and answer the question about the importance of the marine environment and how we reap benefits through my personal story. So I come from the Bahamas, and Baja, Mar put together is, shallow seas. So I'm from the island of the shallow seas, and one of the astronauts said it was the most beautiful place from space. I agree. But I am the ninth child of 9 children, really big family. And on weekends and the summers, the thing to do to get out of the house was to go to the beach, to hit the sea, and all summer long. And what I discovered and experienced as a child was that the sea was the place where I felt most free, where I felt immense joy, where I had a sense of amazement and wonder about the vastness that I saw in front of me. And so it was all about just, fun, recreation, joy. Fast forward 18, 19 years, and I'm in college. And, I was having one of those experiences where you're having a tough semester coming up and you need an easy class. And so a friend of mine said, go ahead and you should take marine biology. You're sure to get an A in that class. Well, I took the class trying to get an easy A, but what I experienced and what I learned changed the trajectory of my life. It was then that I started to learn that the sea that surrounded me as a child that I loved so much that my very life depended on it. And so we know, I'm not sure who said it. I heard it first from Dr. Sylvia Earle, but that every second breath we breathe comes from the ocean because of the oxygen that is given off from the phytoplankton in the seas. Not only that, we know that most of the solar radiation coming into the planet is absorbed by land and oceans, but most of that from the ocean simply because it covers the majority of the planet's surface. The water we drink may not be salt water, but as it goes through the hydrologic cycle, it's the water that ends back up in our homes and in our bodies. Food. More than 3 billion people around the world depend on seafood as their primary source of protein. And so the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water that we're depending on for our very life. And then there's the temperature control. And so with the oceans absorbing so much of that sunlight, it keeps the earth habitable. Okay, so that's the big picture. We're not surviving without oceans. But for me, it's real personal. I live in a small island nation, and I have, many colleagues that I've met from the Indian Ocean and the Pacific and other areas in the Atlantic, and many people live along coasts. And so our way of life is dependent on the sea. It's a blue economy for us. In the Bahamas, about half of our gross domestic product is dependent on tourism, and most people visit our islands because they want to experience our marine environment or seafood. Coupled with that is our fisheries sector that provides decent work for men and women across our nation, especially in the more far-flung or rural islands where it's less developed. It's important. Our recreation. I mean, if you just listen to the names of local festivals and activities, the Fish Fry, the Conch Fest, the Crab Fest, and all of these things, the regatta, it's a part of who we are as a people. But even the very habitats themselves, like our coral reefs and our mangroves, provide, they're the front line of protection for us when storm waves hit our coasts, and that, coral reefs and mangroves break down that wave energy as it rolls into shore. And so when I think about our economy and our security from a coastal perspective, our food, our cultural identity, it shows up in our art, our music, our storytelling. Everything is like salt water is in our veins. It's a part of who we are. But I was concerned then, and I am concerned now that the very way of life for people like us in islands and coastal areas is under threat due to climate change. Most of the world watched last year in September when the strongest storm that we've ever experienced hit the Bahamas and just devastated two of our islands. It's, as far as we know, the biggest tragedy in our history of our country. But Dorian was actually the fourth major record-breaking storm that has hit us in the last 5 years. So we are seeing the intensity and the frequency of these storms increasing. Why? Hurricanes draw strength from the ocean, and our oceans are warming. The Bahamas, like many other small island nations, we contribute less than 1% to greenhouse gas emissions, but we have disproportionate risk levels. We're in the top 10 most vulnerable countries, and part of the reason for that is that 80% of our landmass is less than a meter above sea level. This is costing us and projected to cost us about $500 million annually on top of our regular, cost as a country by 2025, because we keep getting hit. And this figure of $500 million was before Dorian hit. And I know that that's been exacerbated now, but we're a country with just less than 400,000 people. So limited human capacity, limited economic resources. And so when I talk about the importance of the marine environment, it's not just about the way I live, it's about my survival, what other people are doing that impacts the ocean, what I'm doing. And so my call to action this morning is whatever it is that you are passionate about, whatever it is that impacts you and that impact others, use your voice. I started off my career as a teacher because I felt it was important to inform and inspire the next generation. Then I focused my attention on teacher training and producing curriculum resources and having a say in changing the national curriculum of my country to make sure that every generation and every teacher that comes through has the tools they need to multiply this message. And now I'm working in policy, where my focus is working on policies, on creating and implementing those that will have tangible, lasting impact both for people and for nature. That's my call to action. That's what I chose to do. And so my question to you is, what's yours? What are you going to do to make a difference? Because I hold fast to this quote by Margaret Mead. Then she says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that ever has.
Wow, that's a very powerful quote and a very powerful presentation as well. I guess that also kind of explains some of the questions I've been getting in this respect. When you talk about what are you passionate about, what are you doing on an individual level. I have a question here from Pradeep from India, and he says that he comes from a country where the Brahmaputra River is being disrespected with pollution to a point where life underwater is dying. So he's asking what he can do as a young person to raise awareness or improve the situation.
Well, one of the things that I think young people can do and do very well is using social media to bring awareness to issues. And because this is the way that we not only connect with people in our country, but people across the world who share that issue. One of the programs I used to work on is called Eco Schools. And Eco Schools has a program called Young Reporters for the Environment. And I think it's a very powerful way to approach getting the word out. And so young people go out and take pictures to document what is happening, and they share their views and they post those articles, and they put the hashtags, and then they get other young people to tag onto those. And so if you have a cell phone, if you have a camera, take a picture, use your voice, use your social media platforms, connect with young people on this panel and around the world who can blow up that message for you so that you can get attention. And while you're doing that, work with those around you who have a similar concern to start to talk about what is the plan? What can we do about this? There are many examples of how we can pull multi-stakeholder groups together to solve problems like ocean pollution. And so those are two starting points I would suggest.
Okay. And just to tie to the ocean pollution, because we also have another question about pollution from Sharon from the US, who is asking, what do you think of plastics pollution that is killing the whales and turtles? And how can we change our behavioral patterns? And then after you answer that question, Manal has asked a couple of questions here that I hope the speakers can be able to answer. So Marcia, over to you.
So the plastics pollution issue is one that definitely comes before us in the Bahamas. I actually just had the opportunity of working with our government on a policy that actually is our first step toward banning plastics. It was passed at the beginning of this year, and it bans 4 types of plastic and styrofoam as a start. But the impetus for that actually came from a youth group here, where there's a young lady. Anyone who's interested in plastic, I can connect you with Crystal Ambrose. We call her Crystal Ocean. She is passionate about plastic pollution, and she started collecting data on plastic pollution in the Bahamas. And she took that data, researched what other countries were doing, and they actually drafted a policy and were able to get enough support to get an audience with the Minister of the Environment. And it ended up on the news, and that was one of the things that helped to, was a tipping point for the country actually working on their plastic pollution legislation.
That's a very good way to do it, tying action with policy implementation. And I think a lot of us as young people should be doing that. So we are actually out of time, but I would like to ask all the speakers here if they could answer Manal's question. I think she has 2. The first one is how to reinforce the climate action during this confinement. And the second one about how to ensure the involvement of young people in this climate action with the absence of internet connection or technology tools like laptops, mobiles, and phones. Anyone who wants to dive in and answer that question?
I'll start and say I'll add to the second, in the absence of technology, you can still do your part. Just like one drop in the ocean has ripples that spread across the sea, you educating yourself and knowing that there are things you can do at home to minimize your own plastic pollution, that is the first step. We cannot be preaching something if we're not doing it ourselves. And as you take action, then you encourage your friends and your family around you to take action and explaining to them why. And, infection spread, but so does good news and good habits.
Camilla, Susan, Elliot, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll chip in. Thank you, Marcia, for your comment. I really like that answer. I especially like the image of the ripples spreading out. I think that's a really powerful one. If we can all start those waves, then that will be brilliant. I know certainly from my work with human nature projects that there's an increasingly connected youth. So I think that problem is diminishing in terms of how many people will be affected. What I would say is I work with, for example, a lot of youth in Central African countries where they might only have internet connection once every fortnight, and that's still enough to be able to connect, to share ideas. Simply having conversations, reaching out to others, whether you have the technology to do so towards international scales, so with people in other countries, or whether you're finding your local community group, starting something new. It doesn't matter as long as you start finding your passion, doing something which matters, something which is really relevant to your community. That's how all of this starts. So Human Nature Project started for me about 11, 12 months ago when I was transitioning from running a local field naturalist group. So a few dozen people meeting once a month into this now global venture across more than 100 countries. So if you do just start something, if you have the ambition to try, then that is how all of the progress in environmentalism has taken place, as Marcia very rightly mentions. We're all very, very dedicated, committed to what we do. So we're all more than happy to help anyone who does get in touch with us. There's a tremendous amount of goodwill out there. If you have an idea, you want to get started, you'll definitely find the support you need.
Yeah,
just quickly add, I would just very quickly say that I think all of our presentations and the questions have highlighted the importance of partnership and the importance of networks. And like Elliot, there are incredible youth organizations that are so active in climate change, in biodiversity conservation. And I invite anybody who wants to get in touch with me to connect you with some of these organizations who are really doing incredible things.
and as a closing question, this was actually directed to Elliot, but I think it applies to all of us here that have been on this panel. It's about extinction, animals and extinction, and it's from Marta from Germany. And I don't know if this is a he or she, forgive me, but they're asking, how can animals that are at the risk of extinction, how can their stories be shared? And I know, Camilla, this might be an issue that you're also well conversant with, working with IUCN and the Red List. So maybe you could give a little bit of what you think can be done, and then everyone else. And then Julie, please, could you do the closing remarks?
Absolutely. So I realized at the beginning of my presentation, I failed to explain IUCN a little bit, which is not an easy feat, but I will tell you, it's one of the oldest environmental organizations, and it's a union of state and non-state members. And there are about 1,300 members that are part of the union. And there is a secretariat. And then there are 6 commissions like the one that I work for, which are volunteer networks of experts. So the commission, the Species Survival Commission, is of course very well known and work on the Red List, which is really a prime reference point for species. And what we try to do as CEC is to translate some of the wealth of information that we have from our experts into stories that everybody can identify with. And a big focus for us is the connection between nature and people, which is undeniable and necessary, I think, to inspire everybody to take action. So we encourage you to tell our story, whether it's sharing resources or writing blogs for us. We're connecting to organizations that do similar work. So don't hesitate to join our commission.
Thank you very much, everyone. I want to thank our audience for the questions and our speakers for the answers. Let me also, again, thank you for joining us today, our virtual audience whose support has been crucial to this work. This has been a very fruitful discussion, and I hope we continue with similar conversations. Feel free to reach out to our speakers and check out the work that they are doing. Maybe in closing, I would like to summarize some of the inputs and the things that our speakers have been able to hint on. These are some of the points that I've come across. Recognizing the humanitarian aspect and the role that people play in nature conservation. Innovation of organic solutions and less reliance on industrial chemicals that affect our ecosystems. Interesting people across the globe. This is something that has come up. We've seen that so many people are now interested and are paying attention to environmental discussions, and the issues now actually being solved. Solutions are coming up. The issue of collaborations has also very much been highlighted on. Collaborate with whoever and reach out to everyone in your circles and in the networks of environmental activists. One also important aspect that was mentioned was passion. Whatever impacts you, use your voice to ensure that you take action for it. Capacity building is also one issue that was talked about. You need to be able to build your capacities in order to have a say in the policies of your country. The use of technology to pass on your messages and also connect with other people. And then never forget to tie action with policy implementation, because by the end of the day, with all the solutions that we come up, if our governments do not come on board to support them, we might most likely not be able to do the work that we need. So we need the government support in all of this. In closing, I am pleased that we've had this conversation today as we celebrate World Environment Day. And this has actually highlighted a critical role of environmentalists at the front line in protecting biodiversity. Each of our speakers has been bold about their work and their experience in their presentations. But lastly, allow me to thank the team that has worked tirelessly over the past few weeks to organize this event. Let's keep the conversation online, ongoing. Visit our Facebook pages and also Twitter accounts and in person when you can. Until next time, thank you for joining us. I've been Juliet Grace, your moderator, together with Maria, hosting this conversation today. Have a good day.
Mm.